Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're setting the stage for a truly thrilling 1798 clash of empires, one that literally changed the course of history. We're talking about a story packed with incredible ambition, unmatched tactical genius, and, well, a completely catastrophic miscalculation on the high seas. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly did one of history's absolute greatest generals win a war but manage to lose his entire army in a single night? I know, it sounds straight out of a high-stakes heist movie, right? A place where brilliant strategy meets catastrophic hubris. But this actually happened to Napoleon Bonaparte. Let's unpack exactly how this disaster unfolded.
Part 1. The Geopolitical Chessboard. The Ultimate High-Stakes Gamble. Okay, let's dive into this.
By 1798, Napoleon was looking far beyond Europe. He wanted to cripple his greatest rival. Now, France had an absolutely unmatched land army. But Britain? They ruled the waves with an unrivaled royal navy. And because Britain's immense wealth flowed directly from its maritime trade with India, Napoleon came up with a brilliantly audacious solution. He was going to conquer Egypt. By taking Egypt, he realized he could choke off the Red Sea trade route, effectively severing Britain's most lucrative lifeline and setting up an unbreakable French stronghold in the east.
Part 2. The Phantom Armada, the ultimate cat-and-mouse game.
So here's the setup. Napoleon faced a seemingly impossible obstacle. He had to move an entire invasion force all the way across the Mediterranean without being intercepted by British Rear Admiral Horatio Nelson. The logistics here were just staggering. To pull this off, Napoleon assembled a massive armada of over 400 transport ships, all escorted by 13 heavily armed ships of the line, the massive floating fortresses of the era. And what exactly were those 400 transport ships carrying? A staggering 35,000 men. Just try to picture that for a second. Imagine trying to sneak a floating city of 35,000 soldiers past the world's most dangerous navy. Now, Nelson knew the French had left their ports, for sure, but he had absolutely zero idea what their final destination was.
Walking through this timeline reveals some incredible tension. So they leave the French ports, heading out into the total unknown. Then, this heavy, blinding fog descends over the Mediterranean. And get this, in the pitch-black, heavy night fog, these two massive fleets actually cross paths. They passed each other blindly, completely unaware of how incredibly close they were. Through sheer luck and the cover of weather, Napoleon manages to slip right past the world's greatest navy, landing his forces safely at Alexandria on July 1st. It wouldn't be until a full month later, August 1st, that Nelson finally discovered them.
Part 3. The Fatal Anchorage. A false sense of security. Right, so having landed successfully, Napoleon marched inland. He left his naval fleet anchored in this wide, sweeping curve known as Aboukir Bay, under the command of Vice Admiral Bruys. And this brings us to a really crucial geographic concept: shoals. Shoals are basically shallow waters containing submerged sandbanks or hazards that prevent large ships from passing through safely. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Admiral Bruys looked at the shoals between his ships and the beach and mistakenly believed they made his landward side completely impenetrable. He thought he had a natural, unbreakable wall guarding his back.
Because of that belief, Bruys made some truly catastrophic assumptions. He anchored his 13 battleships in a defensive line parallel to the shore. He figured the British absolutely had to attack from the open sea, right into the teeth of his combined broadsides. Feeling completely secure in this setup, he didn't even bother to clear his port side, the side facing the shore, for combat. In an act of pure hubris, he literally used the portside gun decks of his warships as storage closets. Talk about a fatal flaw.
Part 4. The Night of Fire. Nelson's immediate assault.
Moving into the late afternoon of August 1st, Nelson finally spots the French, and instead of waiting, he defies all convention and orders an immediate assault right there in the dangerous fading twilight. As the British closed in, Captain Thomas Foley of the HMS Goliath noticed something absolutely critical through his spyglass. The anchor cables of the French ships, they were slack. So the crucial point is Foley's brilliant deduction here. He realized that if the cables were slack, there had to be a gap between the French line and those dangerous shoals. Basically, if there was enough water depth for a massive French ship to swing on its anchor, there was enough water for a British ship to sail right inside the enemy line.
Foley basically bypassed the vault. Instead of lining up on the open ocean side like you'd expect, he steered the Goliath straight across the bow of the lead French ship and slipped right inside the French line, wedging himself between the enemy and the shore. 4 more British ships followed his lead, while the rest of Nelson's fleet engaged from the seaside. The French were caught in this absolutely devastating crossfire. And remember those port sides they were using for storage? Yeah, they were completely uncleared. The French were caught totally off guard and were completely unable to fire back effectively at the British ships that had just slipped behind them. The visceral climax of the battle hit around 10 p.m. The French flagship, the massive 120-gun Lorient, caught fire. The flames raged totally out of control, quickly reaching the ship's massive powder magazines. And what happened next was, well, absolutely terrifying. The Lorient detonated in what was one of the largest man-made blasts in history up to that point. The sheer terrifying magnitude of the shockwave actually tore seams open on the adjacent ships.
One witness described the immediate aftermath like this: a stunned, absolute ceasefire across the entire bay for a full 10 minutes as flaming debris rained down from the night sky. Just take a second and imagine that silence. The roar of the explosion was so deafening, so completely overwhelming, that sailors on both sides simply stopped fighting. They just stood there in absolute awe as the devastation rained down around them in the dark. Part 5, the strategic trap. Let's move to Rafad and see how this builds into the aftermath of Aboukir Bay. The numbers from the next morning paint a shockingly stark picture. The French Mediterranean fleet was, for all intents and purposes, completely annihilated. Out of their 13 ships of the line, 11 were captured or destroyed. And the British, they didn't lose a single vessel. No way, right? All 13 of Nelson's ships survived. The French naval presence essentially ceased to exist overnight. And this brings us to the ultimate bitter reversal. Because meanwhile, Napoleon had actually just won the land war. He had successfully crushed the local forces at the Battle of the Pyramids. But the news of this naval loss, it was a strategic death sentence. Without his fleet, he had absolutely no way to resupply his army. Even worse, he had no fleet to bring his army home. His brilliant geopolitical thrust had turned into a suffocating trap. Napoleon was eventually forced to abandon his stranded army, slipping back to France on a fast frigate to seize political power, leaving his troops behind to ultimately surrender to the British. And this brilliantly illustrates a timeless and absolutely crucial military concept: sea lines of communication. Basically, these are the vital maritime pathways required for military logistics, trade, and ultimately, survival. Napoleon learned the hard way that a land army, no matter how incredibly powerful it is completely vulnerable if its supply lines over the water are severed. It's a harsh reality of global strategy, and it remains just as relevant today as it was back in 1798. You can win every single battle on the dirt, but can you survive without the sea? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the delicate balance of strategy that shapes our world.